This is the third part in our series on the cosmos on trial. Our first two lessons mainly focused on episode 1. In this lesson, we are going to begin diving into the second episode, but not in any particular order. Neil starts the second episode talking about how man was on Earth 30,000 years ago during the Ice Age before there were any dogs. He then goes on to explain how he believes we have so many dogs now. He said about 15,000 years ago that wolves figured out that it was better to work for humans than to compete against them because they could simply enjoy being taken care of by the humans and being able to enjoy their leftovers. He claims that the gray wolf would evolve into the dogs that we have now. He called it survival of the friendliest. He said that the people would kill the wolves that could not be trained and they would allow the wolves that were trainable to breed. He said that this kind of evolution is called artificial selection or breeding. We took evolution into our own hands. In just 15,000 years, we took the gray wolf and turned it into all the kinds of dogs that we have now. We did the same thing with our plants and with other animals. He said this is the awesome power of evolution. He is another example of this from a brown bear. He takes this ship of imagination into the bear and looks at an individual cell and talks about the proteins called kinsin, which are a workhorse within the cell that move things around. These tiny little creatures make up every cell, including our own. Next, he starts talking about DNA and how it is the ancient scripture of our genetic code and how it is written in a language that all life can read. He explains how that DNA tells things how to grow, move, digest, and so on. He points out how every living thing has DNA and how DNA can have slight changes which can cause a good result or a bad one. He talks about how some mutations in the DNA do nothing while others may give you an advantage. He gives the brown bear as an example, saying that the DNA mutated and caused the brown bear to give birth to a white bear, which gave it an advantage over the brown bear in the snowy environment they were in. He claims that natural selection caused this and that eventually the white bear would dominate because it would be easier for the white bear to sneak up on its prey in the snow than for the brown bear. So the brown bear would be forced to move off to a new location or to die off. He says this is what Charles Darwin meant by the origin of species. I'm going to talk more about cells and DNA later and show that they offer strong evidence for a designer. But what we need to do right now is to understand what Neil has just described. Now, I cannot know the heart of a man, but it seems to me that many of those who teach evolution and call it a fact do it in a very tricky way, because there are two different kinds of evolution. And one of them is a fact, but the other is not. So if I wanted to be vague, I could even say that I believe in evolution and leave it at that. When you listen to a scientist talk, you find them blending the two kinds of evolution together so that it seems that both types are true. The two types of evolution are microevolution and macroevolution. Microevolution simply means that small changes occur, but they do not change into a different kind. For example, if the gray wolf is truly the original dog from which all kinds of dogs came from, this would be microevolution, because no matter how many different colors, sizes, and so on occur over time, all these different dogs are still of the same kind. They did not change into a cat or another kind of animal. Neil said that all of these variety of dogs came about over 15,000 years. But there is evidence that shows that it's possible to achieve the amount of differing dogs we have in a short time. which means it did not take 15,000 years to achieve it. An article written by Brian Thomas, M.S., on the origin of dogs, he wrote this: University of Otago archaeologist Helen Leach wrote that systematic breeding only emerged within the past 300 years. Based on her findings, this would mean that man has brought about over 200 different breeds of dogs within 300 years. A recent experiment in Russia certainly shows that many different breeds can be achieved in a short time in the animal kingdom. From this same article, read this: researchers selected foxes that were the least aggressive and then bred them. They chose 100 females and 30 males as the initial parental generation. Then they carried forward the tamest approximately 10% into each successive generation. As a result of such a rigorous selection, the offspring exhibiting the aggressive and fear avoidance responses were eliminated from the experimental population in just 2 to 3 generations of selection, the study authors wrote. They didn't need thousands of years to produce these changes, just 3 generations. And at the 6th generation, fox pups eagerly sought human contact, complete with wagging tails, whining, whimpering, and licking in a dog-like manner. Quite unexpectedly, however, the newly tamed foxes displayed standard mammalian traits of domestication. Wild horses, cows, sheep, pigs, dogs, and rabbits have stable traits like erect ears, straight tails, uniform coat colors, restricted breeding seasons, and similar body sizes. However, the tame varieties often have floppy ears, curled tails, spotted coat colors, variation in coat textures and lengths, no set breeding seasons, and marked skeletal size and proportion differences. This shows that it would not take 15,000 years to produce the various breeds of dogs that we have today. I can promise you that the evolutionist has no hard evidence to back up this 15,000 year time span, nor the alleged 30,000 year time span that man supposedly stood up and walked for the first time on the earth. Like the dogs, we can say the same thing about the bear. Just because a change happened that made it have white fur instead of brown does not change the fact that it is still of the same kind, because it is a bear. We can see these kinds of changes within all of life. The Bible certainly makes it clear that God created everything after its own kind. For example, Genesis 1 verse 24 says this: Then God said, Let the earth bring forth the living creature according to its kind, cattle and creeping thing and beast of the earth, each according to its kind. And it was so. And God made the beast of the earth according to its kind, cattle according to its kind, and everything that creeps on the earth according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. The second kind of evolution is the one that is not true, macroevolution, which is also called organic evolution. It teaches that everything comes from a common ancestor, which is what the evolutionists want us to believe. This kind of evolution is the kind that takes millions of years, which requires one kind of creature to turn into another kind of creature. And there's absolutely no evidence for this kind of evolution. Please remember that the scientific method says you must be able to observe and test your hypothesis before it can become a theory, and then it also must be tested even more to become a law. Neil told us to question everything. Well, when we test macroevolution and see that there is no evidence to observe of anything changing from one kind to another, and there's no way to test this, it should speak volumes that macroevolution is nothing more than a fairy tale. Neil continues to give what he thinks is more evidence that we came from a common ancestor. He said that we kind of cringe when we think about the idea of sharing a common ancestry with apes. He says our closest relative is the chimpanzee. He says that we like to think that we were created separately to make us feel special. He then begins to point out how trees, butterflies, and other living things all have similarities in their DNA. Therefore, we must have all been related to one another and came from a common ancestor. On the surface, it may sound logical that if we have some similarities in our DNA with other living things, perhaps we are related somehow. But having some similarities does not mean that we had to come from a common ancestor. We could also say that the differences that we have in our DNA proves that we are not related in any way. So those who want to focus on the similarities that we have in our DNA with other things, they also need to focus on the differences. However, the fact that every living thing has DNA does point to a creator because he designed every living thing with DNA. What about the claim of the chimpanzee being one of our closest relatives? Depending on whose data you look at, they say that we have somewhere between 95 to 99% in common in our DNA. Does this mean that we are closely related to the monkey? I want you to consider what Dr. Don Batten's answer to this was. What if human and chimp DNA was even 96% similar? What would that mean? Would it mean that the humans could have evolved from a common ancestor with chimps? Not at all. The amount of information in the 3 billion base pairs in the DNA in every human cell has been estimated to be equivalent to that in 1,000 books of encyclopedia size. If humans were only 4% different, this still amounts to 120 million base pairs, equivalent to approximately 12 million words or 40 large books of information. This is surely an impossible barrier for mutations to cross. Neil is not finished yet because he really wants us to use our imagination in what he presents next. He says that the common belief is that life was too complex to be created by unguided evolution. He gives a great example of this, the human eye. He points out how complex the human eye is and how the brain has to be wired to make it work. He points out how it is more complicated than any device crafted by man. After giving a great example of intelligent design, he tries to explain away how the complexity of the eye came about by random chance. Keep in mind, there is no way for him to prove what he's about to say, and he's even admitted that he has no idea how life began. He goes back 4 billion years to a pool of water and claims after a few 100 million years that the DNA of a bacteria had a microscopic copying error. This random mutation gave that microbe a protein that allowed it to absorb sunlight. He even showed what the microbe would be able to see at that time. Over time, supposedly, more mutations occur to cause these new bacteria to flee from the light. Next, he jumps from bacteria having this mutation to more advanced one-celled organisms having it. But its protein forms a pigment to let it see the light even better. Next comes a multi-celled animal, he called a worm, that supposedly develops a dimple in that pigment spot, giving it the ability to tell the difference between light and shadow. Later, the dimple deepens and evolved into a socket with a small opening. Natural selection was slowly sculpting the eye, he said. The opening contracted to a pinhole covered by a protective transparent membrane. After more time, a new feature evolved that changed everything, a lens. He claims our eyes originally evolved to see underwater. When the first creature, our alleged great ancestor, left the water, its eyesight was not good, and it has not been good ever since. He says after 375 million years, we cannot see things right in front of our noses or see fine details in darkness. He says, why didn't this change? He said evolution can only make small adaptive changes. It cannot start over from scratch. In the animal kingdom, we find all the different stages of the eyes in various animals, he said. So he claims that the complexity of the human eye possesses no challenge to evolution by natural selection. In fact, he says the eye and all of biology makes no sense without evolution. Then he says some claim evolution is just a theory. But like the theory of gravity, it is a scientific fact. Evolution really happened, according to him. I think there is a good reason Neil tried to explain away the complexity of the eye using evolution, because the eye offers strong proof that evolution is not true. Neil made the reference to Darwin while he was talking about all of this because a lot of the evolutionists out there esteem him highly. Though Charles Darwin believed in evolution, I want you to notice what he admitted in his book, The Origin of Species. To suppose that the eye, with all its imitable contrivances for adjusting the focus to different distances, for admitting different amounts of light, and for correction of spherical and chromatic aberration, an optical aberration in which the image has colored fringes, could have been formed by natural selection seems, I freely confess, absurd in the highest sense. I just wonder if Darwin were alive today, if he would still hold his view on evolution now that we know so much more about the complexity of life. Other evolutionists have been troubled by the human eye as well. Dr. Jastrow, writing in 1981, said this: "The eye is a marvelous instrument, resembling a telescope of the highest quality, with a lens, an adjustable focus, a variable diaphragm for controlling the amount of light, and optical corrections for spherical and chromatic aberration. The eye appears to have been designed. No designer of telescopes could have done better. How could this marvelous instrument have evolved by chance through a succession of random events?" This same man further states, "There seems to be no direct proof that evolution can work these miracles. It is hard to accept the evolution of the eyes as a product of chance." The way the eye works is extremely complex. Images of light enter the eye at 186,000 miles per second through the iris, which opens and shuts like a diaphragm of a camera to let just the right amount of light in. Then the image is focused by the lens of the eye upside down on the retina at the rear of the eyeball. That image is picked up by some 137 million nerve endings, which sends the information to the brain at 300 miles an hour for processing. There are a lot more details of this process of seeing an image, but this basic information gives you a glimpse into how well the eyes and the brain work together just for us to see one image. Many compare the eye to a camera. In fact, the camera was patterned after the human eye. Of course, no camera is capable of doing what the eye does. It has been estimated that our eyes can take and process 500,000 pictures per day. No one has a problem understanding that a camera was designed by man. Why would anyone have any problem seeing that one of the most sophisticated cameras out there, the human eye, was designed? As the Bible proclaims in Proverbs 20, verse number 12, "The hearing ear and the seeing eye, the Lord has made them both." So I have to disagree with Neil. The eye does give evolution all kinds of trouble because nothing he said can be proven by the scientific method. I know that Neil only gave us the example of the eye, but I want to take some time to look at the human body because more than just the complexity of the eye disproves evolution. As the ancient scholar Augustine said, "Men go abroad to wonder at the height of the mountains, at the huge wave of the sea, at the long course of the rivers, at the vast compass of the earth, at the circular motion of the stars, and they pass by themselves without wondering." Sometimes we get so caught up in looking at the beauty and complexity of the universe and other living things around us that we forget to think about how marvelous and complex we are. Those who do not want to believe in God simply try to explain away our origin by saying that we magically evolved from the first creature that crawled out from the water into this complex creature that we are today, all by chance. The more we learn from modern science of just how complicated we are, the more ridiculous the evolutionists look. Even evolutionists cannot deny the immense complexity of our bodies. As one evolutionist said, "When you come right down to it, the most incredible creation in the universe is you, with your fantastic senses and strengths, your ingenious defense systems, and mental capabilities so great you can never use them to the fullest. Your body is a structural masterpiece, more amazing than science fiction. Can anyone honestly describe a human as being a structural masterpiece and then in the same breath say that that masterpiece just happened by luck? Or does it make more sense that the masterpiece had an artist? To me, the answer is simple. God is the artist who created us. And every part of our bodies, down to our cells, screams intelligent design and not some lucky mutation over a long period of time. For simplicity's sake, we can break the body down into 4 areas. Number 1, there are cells, which are the smallest unit of life. Number 2, there are tissues, such as muscle tissue and nerve tissue. Number 3, there are organs, such as the heart and liver. Number 4, there are systems, such as the circulatory system and digestive system. When you examine these 4 areas of the body and how they make the body live and function, it becomes quite clear that our bodies were designed. As Wayne Jackson said, "It is therefore quite clear that the physical body has been marvelously designed and intricately organized for the purpose of facilitating human existence upon the planet Earth." First, let's consider the complexity of a cell. It has been estimated that an average adult has 100 trillion cells in their body. If our cells were put end to end, they could encircle the earth 200 times. Our cells are different shapes, sizes, and have different life expectancies depending on what they do. For example, our red blood cells are saucer-shaped and are fairly flat, which makes it easier for them to transfer the oxygen and carbon dioxide they carry through the body, while nerve cells have long, thin extensions to transmit their messages. Before we had the technology to examine a cell closely, some thought the cell was nothing more than a blob of protoplasm. As Lester and Heffley put it, we once thought that the cell, the basic unit of life, was a simple bag of protoplasm. Then we learned that each cell in any life form is a teeming micro-universe of compartments, structures, and chemical agents. A single cell can be broken down into 3 major categories. Number 1, there is the cell membrane, which encloses and protects the organism. This is a very thin layer that consists of protein and fat, and it acts like a filter by only allowing certain things in and out. As Dr. Ernest Bourke, an evolutionist, said, "The membrane recognizes with its uncanny molecular memory hundreds of compounds swimming around it and permits or denies passage according to the cell's requirements." Though scientists like this can see such complexity in the cell that is uncanny, they have to continue to chalk it all up to random mutations that happened over time. Just this one layer of our cell shows that it was intelligently designed. Number 2, within the second part of the cell, known as cytoplasm, it contains a number of specialized components. For example, there are about 1,000 mitochondria, which are miniature power plants that burn the food taken in for energy. It also contains tiny networks called endoplasmic reticulum, which are involved in transporting materials from one part of the cell to another. There are also microscopic units called ribosome, which produce proteins. The third part of the cell is the nucleus, which is the brain of the cell. The nucleus contains chromosomes and a chemical called DNA. DNA is a supermolecule that carries the genetic information necessary for the replication of the cell. If the DNA found in one of our cells was decoded into English, it would fill a 1,000-volume set of encyclopedias that are around 600 pages each. When you do the simple math, that works out to be 600,000 pages of information. As you try to visualize the amount of information and how much space that would take up in all these books, this is just the DNA found in one cell. Even more amazing than this is the amount of space it would take up to house all the DNA that makes up a human body, because it would actually fit into a container about the size of an aspirin. I ask you, do you think that that amount of information, which is stored chemically in such a small package, could happen by some random mutation? Or do you see it like I do, as something that had to have been intelligently designed? Consider what Wayne Jackson says about the structure of DNA. A DNA molecule is composed of units of nucleotides. These are chemical combinations of sugar, phosphate, and 4 bases: adenine, thymine, guanine, or cytosine. These bases bind the nucleotides in the spiral DNA molecule. In a strand of DNA, the nucleotides are arranged in a specific order, along what sort of looks like a twisted ladder. The order of arrangement forms the blueprint that regulates the production of all living things. It does not matter if you're looking at the cells of a tree, a mouse, or a human. The DNA is the blueprint that tells the cells what to be. The DNA code is like having a program for a computer. If you install Windows on it, it will be a Windows-based system. If you install Apple on it, it will be an Apple system. Let me ask you a question. Did the code that makes Windows or Apple work just happen? Or did it have a creator? It had a creator. The same thing is true when you look at our DNA or the DNA of other creatures. The code did not just appear. No, it stands to reason that it was created by an intelligent designer, which we know is God. In their book, The Mystery of Life's Origin, the authors ask an interesting question. An intelligible communication via radio signal from some distant galaxy would be widely held as evidence of an intelligent source. Why then doesn't the message sequence of the DNA molecule also constitute evidence for an intelligent source? Dr. James Coppedge had this to say: "By all the rules of reason, could there be a code which carries a message without someone originating that code? It would seem self-evident that any such complex message system, which is seen to be wise and efficient, requires not only intelligence, but a person behind it." One more fact about DNA is that while it contains the code of life, it cannot implement the code directly to produce things. Instead, the DNA produces an acid called RNA, which takes the blueprint from the DNA and makes it a reality. To put it another way, DNA is the contractor and RNA is the worker who does the building. So DNA and RNA must work together to assemble the human body. Again, these complex things working together to form the human body is a clear statement to the fact that we are designed by God. I agree with David, who said in Psalm 139 and verse 13, "For you formed my inward parts. You covered me in my mother's womb. I will praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made." If you will remember, Neil talked about a specific part of a cell called a kinesin when he was talking about the bear. And he said that every cell has these, including ours. Kinesin was discovered in the 1980s and belongs to a class of motor protons, which means that they are little workhorses that transport their cargo from the center of the cell toward the outside. These things look like they walk as they transport their cargo. These are little machines within a cell. Even these little cargo proteins show another complexity of the cell that supports the idea of intelligent design. There are many more details we could look at within a cell, but I have shared enough information with you to show just how complex one of our cells are, which again offers strong proof that there is no way that all that goes on in one cell could have happened by random chance. The cell by itself defies evolution for me. But as we continue to look at how our bodies work and how things have to be just right for them to work together, proves beyond a shadow of a doubt to me that there is no way that this all happened by random mutations that happened over millions of years. We have learned a lot in this lesson about the difference between microevolution and macroevolution. We've begun to take a look at how marvelous and complex the human body really is, and how it is absurd to think that we came about by random change dictated by natural selection. I will continue looking at the human body in our next lesson.